by looking at what's happening in other countries in terms of, just interventions by the governments. And I did some research. Apologies, that should be the United Kingdom's flag. So the US has introduced a $2 trillion stimulus package. You can see there's some of the interventions for the SMEs. The same with the UK. They have a $330 billion package support for businesses. The Chancellor of the Exchequer announced that in March. And even after the announcement, they then had some top-up interventions as well in terms of loans, grants, cash grants, and then just in terms of the duration for paying back loans. Germany has also done the same, where Angela Merkel has introduced a limitless loan program for the country's small businesses, and they will lend as much as $862,000 to a business. Again, even South Africa, if you come into Africa, has launched a debt relief fund to support all MSMEs in South Africa. So what you do is you log on to the system and there's like a whole array of requirements, but once you pass all those requirements, then you can actually access the debt relief fund. So this is interesting, just looking around the world in terms of what's happening with SMEs and the governments. But then we come into Nigeria. I saw an article by Business Day, and I sought to cite some of it, which said MSMEs are the bedrock of the economy, accounting for over 95% of all the businesses. Close to 40-something million MSMEs contribute 50% to Nigeria's GDP, as we all know. I mean, this is a known fact, and they account for 86.3% of employment. So SMEs are so significant. There's no better time like now for a WIMBIZ to be discussing MSMEs and SMEs and interventions. And then when we think about just the bottom of the pyramid, the micro businesses, which represents the poorer population earning less than $2 a day, are there as well. So when we think about SMEs, we have to remember that there are just so many subcategories, and there are different ways to delineate that sector in a sense. Okay, so I'll go into the actual crux of it. And like I said before, I'm just citing what President Kagame said, global funding, yes, it's good, and we've just accessed IMF loan as a government. But I think also when we think about it, it's not only funding that is the solution when we think about SMEs. So I want to address SMEs first of all, before we go into interventions. And I think there's been a lot of discussion and engagement, and there's lots of it's activity, and it's good because it's nice to have people expressing themselves and just sharing and making all these requests. But I think also referencing what a mentor of mine said, it's important for SMEs not to fall into a victim mentality at this point, right? So even the governments are thinking through ways, they've never experienced something like this before. And so for them, as much as we want them to do more for SMEs, it's important to also know that they are also trying to, I guess, just find their feet with all of this and do their best. They are listening. It may seem like, okay, things are not moving as quickly enough, but I don't think there's any government that has, figured it out in its entirety. So I think the approach would be to seek an approach, to approach it with more of a collaborative mindset. So either collaborating, like having fora with the public sector to dialogue, or even thinking about your own value chain. So you're not the only SME going through this. There are other parts of your value chain that are impacted. How can I think in that kind of way, right? The second point I'll make is to be afraid, not to be afraid, rather face those fears. So if you need to cut costs, do so. If you need to communicate transparently with employees, absolutely, you must do so. And of course, with customers, I had there as well, take a hiatus if you can afford to, just to rethink your strategy and business model that allows you to then begin to pivot or explore other areas you wouldn't have before. The third point is not to be ignorant. Be aware of everything going on. Also even be aware, like I did my research with regards to the different governments and what's happening. I think it's important to stay abreast of relevant news and information that can help you, or even things locally, such that when they're advertised, you can then tap into it and you're not left in the dark. The fourth point, and I find that one of the most important actually, now that entrepreneurs are going through this very challenging time, is not to isolate. And I think the only way that I've been able to even navigate this well has been to rely on support systems, because a lot of entrepreneurs are going through the stress, the anxiety, some even depression. And so community groups and networks, for example, WIMBIZ, are good, because then you can rely on fellow members, or even access information that will help you. Join sessions like this that would definitely help you change your thinking. And even, for example, Naija startups, which is the community that I run as well, we've just set up a forum that allows businesses to discuss different challenges for people to work through. And then when it comes to emotional help, we've partnered with therapists and psychiatrists to offer pro bono counseling, because it's actually, this is really major for a lot of businesses. And then the fifth is not to miss opportunities in front of you. So this is a time for a lot of us to actually work on our businesses. I had a session yesterday with a consultant, and she helped me to think through our expansion strategy and expansion plan. And if I didn't have that session, I probably would have been very lost. So it's just, having the support, but also working on the business as opposed to just in the business day to day. And so that helps you, because then it gives you an edge for when things are back, whenever that will be. Okay. So in looking at interventions, some of the things that I have down here have been, from listening to a lot of business leaders, gleaning on their wisdom, reading the news, listening to the news, reading articles, thinking through things that will really help businesses. And we all know that virtual is the agenda now for so many businesses. I literally got off a call with a colleague now, and we're just considering the fact that a lot of organizations will start rethinking actually people even going into work. So when you think about real estate, you have to approach it with a different view. And so digitization is one thing that we would imagine that would be at the forefront of the government's minds, or public sector or decision makers' minds, right? In terms of empowering more businesses to learn digital skills, even businesses at the bottom of the pyramid, because there's going to be more activity in the digital space. So that's the first that I would imagine that would be an intervention. And I already know, because I read an article, that the government is now prioritizing technology in that regard. And the second, which is already being done, but I do believe we can do a bit more in terms of democratization of payments, such that more businesses can then transact digitally. I don't know if many of you saw the videos on, was it Monday, with people at the banks and the crowds. To be able to avoid that would be to have more people embrace financial technology and adopt e-payments. The third, which is something I've coined myself, is policy setting, policy communication, and policy adoption. I think there's just one thing to develop a policy and set it, and it's all nice sitting up there. But then how many people know about this policy? How do you how does the message trickle down to the different groups, different economic classes, socioeconomic classes? How do you ensure that it's adopted? So I think just setting a policy is not enough. And so when we think about even policy communication, there are things that would benefit businesses that businesses themselves don't even know about, because the information hasn't reached them. So I think this is one way that decision makers can begin to think about approaches to engaging and really impacting the target audience. The fourth, if this was tackled, it would be the future of this continent, because Nigeria has so much in terms of resources, human capital, appetites, just the grit, that it's a bit sad when you realize that many of us, even people like me, are not considering beginning to produce in country. So we're still importing, we're still wanting to go into other fancy sectors. And so manufacturing is not as attractive. So I think this is an opportunity for decision makers and stakeholders to begin to advertise or sensitize entrepreneurs to consider this sector. I have a friend who produces toothpicks, and now he even exports across Africa. I don't know why many of us aren't thinking that way. So I think there's quite a bit to be done there. And then The fifth, I'd probably say we're already doing that a lot in these countries, focusing on agriculture, but I think that needs even more significant investment, and not just financial investment, human capital, education, support, just expansion of the value chain, because we have, what it takes. We have all the, you call them raw materials. It's just, okay, when it comes to refinement, when it comes to policies and trade, how our business owners supported. So those are some of the things that I think from an intervention standpoint, we can begin to look into even more, and also bring to the table whenever we have the opportunities to dialogue with key stakeholders. Sorry, I just closed that. I missed one more bit. Okay, so that was it. And so in closing, that I would probably just touch on three things, but I think the overarching messages for everyone, every part of the sector, or every part of the nation, every sector within the nation, both public, both private, even non-profits, begin to be contrarian and think different, because that's the only way we can really prepare ourselves for whatever is to come, and we don't know what's to come. And so things like collaboration, I imagine, because that's not a common thing culturally for Nigerians or even Africans, I think that should then be considered even more. And it's not just to say we're partnering. It's okay, it's actual mergers and acquisitions, because then you're thinking big. So yes, being a small business is nice and it's cute, but it's a lot of work. And sometimes you just don't see it as worth it in the end. But if you're able to partner with stakeholders that can really add value, and for both of you or three of you or four of you to capture real value, then that's a lot to be said for impact and just being happy as an individual. So that's the first thing. The second I'd say is, and I think I mentioned this before, in thinking about SMEs and how support is required at this point very urgently, it's important for us to consider other parts of our value chain when we're thinking about all the help we need to get. And the third, which I heard yesterday as an interesting point, was we cannot hide behind coronavirus or COVID-19 or the pandemic as the root of certain problems, because this has amplified certain problems, but it's not actually the cause. So we still need to look at how we can fix problems, obviously public sector wise, but even in our businesses, when we bring it down a little bit. So if I have issues with operations, no amount of funding will help me if I haven't figured that out. And so we, like I said before, need to work on our businesses and just ensure that we have it structured, we have things in place, such that then, when we get the right interventions and support, we can then, grow. So those are the points.
Thank you very much, Aramide. Thank you very much. Can we have some virtual claps for Aramide? Thank you so much. So to sort of wrap up what Aramide said, I took down a few notes. The first one is that don't fall into the victim mentality. There's a tendency to want to do that. Oh, there's no money, there's no funding, we don't have access to funding. Those problems would always remain with us. The other point that Aramide made is that government is listening. It might look like they are not, but government certainly is listening. But they themselves are trying to figure it out, as with other governments around the world. I mean, we haven't been this route before. This hasn't happened, at least not in the last few generations. You have to have, as an SME, a collaborative mindset. You are not alone in this. Don't be afraid, Aramide admonishes. Let's face our fears, and then it's important also to then rethink our strategy. She has also advised that we shouldn't isolate, reach out to networks such as the platform that WIMBIZ offers. Then there's actually going to be more activity in the digital space. Government is prioritizing technology, so a lot of e-payments, e-commerce will come to the fore. There also needs to be more focus on the agri sector. The value chain needs to be further expanded. we cannot hide behind COVID-19. I think that was a fantastic one because some problems have been there before COVID-19, and if we don't tackle them post-COVID-19, they will remain with us. Thank you, Aramide. I have a couple of questions for you, just to remind participants that you should please put questions in the Q&A box. You can chat in the chat box, but please put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll take all the questions after Gbenga's presentation. So I have two questions for you, Aramide. The first one is, you spoke about collaboration, partnering and all of that. I've heard also SMEs express fears and concern about, how do I actually find a good fit? And then how do I protect my intellectual property, if I want to collaborate, particularly with somebody that is in a similar business space as I am?
Thanks for that question, Bisi. Interestingly, we had an Instagram live session with someone who has a lot of wisdom to share business-wise, and I asked this question about collaboration, and interestingly, she gave me this answer. She's been in partnership for about 30 something years. Oh, sorry, she's been her career is about 30 something years old, and she's been in a business with partners for about 5 years. And prior to even collaborating, they didn't even know themselves, but someone brought them all together. But what they focused on was making sure that everything was in writing. So, you have to have it all in writing. Your agreements are there, very clear for, thinking through also different scenarios, right? So in the event that this happened, what happens? In the event that that happens, who gets this, who gets that? That's one thing. And of course, your question about, identifying partners before I go into protecting IPs is, and she mentioned this as well, partnering with people who complement or have skills or bringing something that complements or add value, right? So if your business is dying, for example, I don't know that having a partner is going to help you sort of resolve some of the issues that you have. It's more of the case where both of you are at a certain level where you feel your strengths can complement each other's needs, as it were. So I think that's the approach that I would definitely use. And then in terms of identifying, in terms of protecting IP, one of my mentors says, an idea is just an idea until there's execution. So yes, if you're already, in business and you're looking to partner, definitely pursue intellectual property. We have a trademark, for example, Naija startups. We didn't initially, but when we could and we could afford it, then we went ahead and did that. So that's one way to protect your IP. And there's a lot of talk now about intellectual property in Nigeria. The financial services sector and the entertainment sector are more advanced in that area. So they are very, very sophisticated when it comes to getting IP, patents, trademarks, copyrights. But other sectors may be up and coming. I think it's important to research. I can't stress that enough. There's information out there. There are webinars on IP even. So there's a lot of information. It's just taking the lead and being intentional. I think that was your question.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much, Aramide. The other one was respect to franchising. What do you think of it as a model for SMEs in this setting in Nigeria? Is it a model that we can replicate?
It is, even though I'm very pro-Africa, I'm pro-Nigerian, pro-African, and so for me, I am looking for SMEs to build our economy. Let's have more injection financially for homegrown businesses, for homegrown brands. We have a mission to empower entrepreneurs to build sustainable businesses in our network, Naija Startups, and that's what we want to see. We want to see brands grow to this, brands that are 80 years old, 90, 100 years old, like the Heinz's of this world, and there's no reason why they cannot be. So for me, that is the focus. It's not that franchising is impossible. It can be complex, but I think for me, my focus would be, okay, yes, there are opportunities for franchise with how we're building our own homegrown brands.
Yeah, so my question was with respect to homegrown brands actually themselves being able to franchise. So for instance, I mean, without mentioning names, a popular local brand, can they begin to think of franchising rather than wanting to replicate themselves have branches all over the place as opposed to actually giving out the franchise.
Thanks for the clarification. Okay, so yes. In the franchise, though, you have to be clear on your ethos and your structure and all of that, but that helps you then expand without having to stretch yourselves centrally. So yes to franchising, but of course you have to get to a certain stage business-wise to be able to do that. We are definitely exploring that across Africa, and so but the key thing is making sure that what is being replicated is already robust, and so then you can then replicate that, whether it's in country or across continents. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I mean, so we have to ensure that the standards are the same across country and from the continent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Aramide. Another round of applause, if you will, for Aramide. And I'll now introduce our second speaker for today, Mr. Gbenga Owolabi. Gbenga is the Business Development Director of Penergia Limited. He is a seasoned professional in strategy development and execution with 25 years experience in consulting and general management. He's a human resources management specialist in organizational design and job evaluation, compensation strategy and structure, design and delivery of practical curriculum in leadership and entrepreneurship development. He's certified by IFC as a trainer in its Business Edge suite of courses and the SME Toolkit. Please let's warmly welcome Mr. Gbenga Owolabi. Virtual claps for him, please. Thank you. Gbenga, over to you.
Thank you very much, BC, and let me try to share my screen at this point. But I hope if I'm not able to do it, I will get the backup from the team in the Secretariat.
Yes, you will. Just let us know.
Okay. So.
Okay, so we'll share the screen from the, okay, yeah, okay.
Is it coming up?
It's starting to share.
All right.
Secretariat, let's share from our end. Thank you.
Okay, is that from the Secretariat?
Not yet. So that's what technology does with you and for you.
Well, I can see a screen shared. So I don't know if it's mine or from the Secretariat.
It's starting to show, okay. It's starting to share, but it hasn't quite come up. The Secretary. Okay, let's go ahead. I'll share it from this end. Let's go ahead.
All right, I want to say once again, thank you for having me as a speaker, and thank you, Aramide, for going ahead of us with your perspectives. And it's really interesting for me because I was working with Accenture many years back when WIMBIZ was being born, conceived, and being brought to birth. And it is many years after. I know that it's a platform that has offered significant value to its stakeholders and members. So I want to say kudos to all those founding fathers and mothers and those who have been driving the effort, and particularly for the leadership that has also put together this webinar at this time. Do I take it, for example, that you're going to be changing the slides, or am I in control from my end?
We'll be changing from the Secretariat, so just prompt when you're ready
to
move to the next one. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Anyway, I guess we can go to the next slide then. I will be looking at the presentation from 4 perspectives, or I guess the agenda will look at the impact of COVID across the world, and then how countries are responding with various interventions. This is very interesting to see that there are a lot of similarities across various countries, but at the same time, they have different areas of emphasis. Then I would dive into Nigeria as a country. What are the interventions that we see out there for SMEs? And what are the few guidelines and how can we access these interventions, hopefully? And I would kind of wrap up the conversation with my recommendation, what I think can be done to improve on the current interventions and hopefully to expand the ability to get it into the hands of more SMEs. Can we go to the next slide? So in terms of the COVID-19 itself, it's a pandemic that has brought about one of probably the largest public health crises in modern history. It started off in Wuhan, like we all know, and it spread to every single country where there are humans living. And regrettably, because of we had to address this transmission rate and try and minimize it, the impact of that, of course, has also affected the economy. The lockdowns across various cities, across various countries have been extended, and this has affected a lot of businesses, more so businesses in the small scale industries, small and medium scale industries. There are forecasts to say that a lot of economies are going to go into recession, and possibly some may even end up in depression, as the case may be. We can also see the fact that it's going to be extended. There are forecasts that there will be recoveries only from the second quarter of 2021. And so between now and that second quarter, a lot of businesses are going to have to struggle to generate demand or to rebuild their disrupted supply chains. And these are unprecedented times, and therefore a lot of interventions need to come in to play to help businesses at this point. Surveys even have been done in Nigeria by KPMG, and a lot of the businesses are surveyed, over 2,500 of them. Each of them have different time frames to when this will all end and last. So the jury is still out. We don't know how the impact will be, but we're hoping that the interventions that are out there will at least begin to ameliorate the effects on various businesses. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, in terms of the various interventions across all the countries that I have looked at, there are many research, there are many publications, many summaries that are out there. But one thing that is very interesting is the fact that all of these interventions tend to speak or align with the ecosystem of their countries, the institutional frameworks that support small businesses. And so those interventions are designed in a way to leverage or to work in ways that those ecosystems can help to make it effective as these interventions get into the hands of SMEs. And that's where you find a lot of the differences coming from. So it's a function of how mature your ecosystem is, how well integrated the ecosystem is, who are the key players, and how do small businesses at the end of the day get support from this ecosystem. And in Nigeria, regrettably, we are still at the very teething stage of building a very robust, mature ecosystem that supports small businesses. And when we say ecosystems, these are areas of policy, finance, markets, various service providers that all work together in an integrated manner to support small business and to promote small businesses for sustainability and for growth. And therefore, when you look at the kinds of intervention we also have in our country, you would see the limitations of these interventions because of the way our current ecosystem itself is structured. And so the differences are clear in that regard. As we go on to the next couple of slides, we begin to see for OECD countries what it is that they have done. Next slide, please. So there are 4 broad areas that interventions have been grouped across countries of the world. There's a list of countries that we have out there, from Argentina down to different countries that have been able to put some interventions out. But in terms of the 4 broad areas, they look at the area of supporting the labor, because SMEs are the major employers of labor in various economies, both the developed and developing economies. They contribute significant number of people employment. So interventions have been in the area of supporting organizations to ameliorate the effect of this pandemic on their labor force. Most organizations right now are not able to work. Even those who are doing remote working, the productivity of their employees have reduced, and there's a huge there's a disruption to the demand of their products and services because people can no longer go out to do the economic transactions, and employers are still saddled with the challenge of having to continue to bear their labor costs. And most economies and most countries are trying to avoid layoffs. In America right now, we know that the unemployment benefit register shot up by up to 10 million in less than 2-3 weeks. And so a lot of interventions are focused on labor. How do we support small businesses to at least provide some cushion where they can still continue to manage their payrolls? The next kinds of groups of interventions have been in the areas of deferrals in regard to financial deferrals. Tax, for example, allowing for people to miss out their tax payments, defer the tax payments, reducing VATs or putting a lot of items on VAT exemptions, and then even for debt relief. A lot of people are also looking at that as part of their interventions to small business. There are mostly financial instruments that are being done, particularly in the area of guaranteeing loans, offering new credits, and subsidizing the credits to small businesses so that they can also ride off the current difficult storms that this pandemic itself is bringing about. And the last category really is more in the area of structural policies and interventions that continue to deepen and strengthen the ecosystem and help the businesses to stay afloat. How do these businesses manage? How do they access markets? How do they access financial systems? How do they export their products? How do they digitize and begin to transition from brick and mortar to the digital economies? So a lot of interventions are also coming out in those regards with respect to the structural policies that enhance. In Aramide's presentation, she was talking about digitization, and a lot of interventions come in the area of supporting small businesses to have broadband access, to be able to play on the internet, in the internet space, the e-commerce space. And these are the kind of things you find that are going on across the countries of the world, various types of interventions in this regard. Can we go to the next slide? But again, when you look at all those 4 broad policy areas, or those 4 broad areas of intervention, the structural policy is very limited. And so mostly it's in terms of the people, it's in terms of finances, deferments of costs or deferment of taxes to government, so that we can support the businesses in terms of their response to the effect of this COVID-19 on their business. But the structural areas are very limited number of interventions. And this is really where, for Nigeria and for a lot of developing economies, this is really where we need mostly these interventions, because really and truly, these are the areas that a lot of small businesses have had challenges having to deal with historically, even up till now. The cost of doing business and the various hurdles that these environmental structures create for small businesses is very difficult. So the environment itself has not been conducive in terms of supporting small business. So these are the places where there needs to be a lot of attention and focus on our own governments to provide interventions for small businesses. Next couple of slides. And so even though there are many announcements by the global financial institutions, you would see that they still all come back to the same sort of focus. You will see debt finance on the top graph to the left, employment support, tax, business costs. So all those 4 major areas that we have mentioned, again with the World Bank track, it still all goes back to that. But when you look at the business climate and the business advisory services of support, which I have shaded in red on the left side, you will find that there are very minimal number of interventions there. And so these interventions do not really enhance the entrepreneurial potential. Yes, they do provide some level of value and some level of funding to businesses, but in terms of really helping these businesses to ride the waves and then to actually tap into their potentials and to overcome this difficult period, these interventions are insufficient in that regard. And interestingly enough, studies have shown that right now, the ecosystem play a lot of importance to the survival of these businesses, small businesses, small and medium-scale businesses across the world. Next slide, please. All right. So these are just announcements of different interventions that have come also from the global financial institutions and the African Development Bank. Huge amount of money that will be spending to provide credit, to provide some form of relief, and to give support to businesses. Next slide. So we'll now begin to look at Nigeria and see what is in it for us as a country. Let's look at the next slide, please.
Next slide, please.
Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so let's look at Nigeria. Again, a lot of our own interventions so far from what it is that we gleaned from the reports in the market and in the news and the internet. They also still kind of go ahead in those two areas of financial interventions and operating costs. So the CBN announced right almost immediately at the back of the intervention, the 50 billion targeted credit. This will be channeled through microfinance banks. A lot of the existing credits that have also been in the marketplace have been reduced in terms of rate. There's been reprieve in terms of repayment of interest, and there's been more moratorium, even for trader money, market money, and the farmer money that is part of the government program to small and micro businesses. A lot of financial interventions are being given. The 2020 Act had already actually reduced the tax rate for small businesses from 30% to 20%. They are also exempted from VAT, and there's been a lot of impact in that regard. However, like I mentioned earlier, the structural interventions, we haven't heard any major announcements in this regard. Yeah, of course, for the operating cost, there is also the suspension of the increase in tariff, and there's still the debate around whether or not 2 months or 3 months of free electricity will also be provided. And so these are the kinds of interventions we're seeing in the marketplace, both at the federal level, at the subnational level, some of which will be through the central bank, Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Trade and Investment, and then some through the Ministry of Finance. And there has to be some sort of coordinated effort to even ensure that these interventions do get taken up by small businesses and they make the right impact and they just go beyond the announcements that they are. Next slide, please. All right, in terms of the access to the CBN fund, which is right now the largest fund, it is being channeled through the Naija Microfinance Bank. This Naija Microfinance Bank is an institution recently established with Central Bank, the Bankers Committee, and NIPOST, and hopefully to leverage all the NIPOST locations in the 774 local governments in the country to be able to penetrate and provide access for finance to small businesses. This institution already was also administering what is called the SMEs Fund on behalf of the Committee of Bankers, and the new fund, which is the COVID support fund, is also going to be administered through them. And the criteria is on the guidelines are on the website for Central Bank. But one thing that is very important to note is the fact that you can also begin to access these funds and use your movable asset with collateral as collateral for access to these funds. Let's go to the next slide. Like I mentioned, when you look at the effectiveness of interventions, particularly in Nigeria, FINA did some studies to look at what were the existing interventions and how impactful are they and what exactly are the small businesses all saying. And that tells you that even though historically there's been all the conversations around collateral, a lot of the banks didn't give out the loans because there were no collateral. With the establishment of the movable asset registry now, that is being taken care of. I will explain that in my next couple of slides. There have also been the issue of incomplete loan applications from the banks. A lot of the small businesses are not financially astute to understand how to make the applications towards their bank loan requirements. Many of these banks and the financial institutions are now working with formalized sector of the industry, now called the BDSP, the Business Service Provider, Business Development Service Providers, who help SMEs to do more financial modeling and financial applications so that they can actually define their business and their loan requirements and be able to access credit. On the SME side, what they've been complaining about is the interest rate not being favorable. But today, now we have a lot of intervention funds that are single digits, many of them less than 9%, and they are even long-term. And the collateral requirements can be movable assets, like what I mentioned earlier. And when it comes to the application processes, now there's access to a lot of business service, business development service providers. A lot of these banks have these organizations as partners who can support SMEs to also help them in terms of the financial intermediation and bringing the entrepreneurs up to speed with financial knowledge and expertise. The size of the loans and the maturity not being sufficient, again, with the financial interventions that we have now, they are long-term, 10 years. They have a lot of moratorium, sometimes 1 year moratorium on the capital repayment and the interest repayment. And so these are already being tailored to ensure that at least they meet the needs and the areas of challenges that businesses have historically been talking about. The next few couple of slides. But then when we start to look at the areas of the structural intervention, like I mentioned, there's still a bit of weakness in that regard. Next slide, please. All right, so the movable asset registry that was created with the support of IFC, it is a registry now where you can go and unlock capital for your business. So before now, when you wanted to access credit from a lot of the banks, the risk acceptance criteria required some level of collateral, and those collateral tended to be fixed assets, immovable, like land and property or heavy machinery. But because small businesses lacked some of these criteria for getting loans, the movable asset collateral institution now allows you to unlock. So you can use your motor vehicle, you can use your fridge, your freezer, your fan, anything that is worth any amount of money, your television, your grinding machines. You can aggregate all these movable assets and create value from them by unlocking them to get access to capital. And these, all you need to do is really register these assets with the registry, and you still keep the custody of the use of that asset for your business or for whatever it is, the venture that it is that you're doing with it. And you can then unlock capital to have access to the credit you need for either working capital or to buy new assets, as the case may be. So with this registry now, like I earlier mentioned to the moderator before this session began, in the last 2-3 years that this registry has already begun operations, they have facilitated credit to almost 2 trillion naira in Nigeria, meaning that those credits would never have been facilitated or advanced to small businesses if this collateral registry did not exist. So this is a major area that the government has intervened to support small businesses, to support enterprises, and therefore, even in this current period of the pandemic, you can unlock a lot of capital. You can generate new cash flow you can get working capital from making your fixed assets to become liquid assets, and then use that to kickstart your business again and begin to build your business back in the market at this point in time. The last couple of slides, can we go to the next one? Okay, I will just be talking about, like I mentioned, the inadequacies of the intervention so far. There was a study by PwC and KPMG, and they also went about trying to identify how do small businesses perceive the current interventions, and the jury is still out. But on the bottom left of the chart, you will see that what is your assessment of government intervention so far? And a lot of the figures there have inadequate, insufficient, grossly inadequate. So only about 14% thereabouts say it is adequate. That's very, very appalling. So it means that we need to ensure that these interventions are robust enough and they actually address the areas where businesses need the interventions, not just in the financial areas. And when you look at the top challenges of SMEs on the bottom right, figure 2, and the one that is on the extreme right of that also, what I highlighted in red, you will find that of all the 6 or 8 items listed, finance, access to finance, or the cost of production and the access to finance are just very limited. there are other things. Enabling environment is top on that chart, and inconsistent government policy also follows, and every other thing has to do with structural areas of impeding businesses in Nigeria. So it's so important that if our interventions are going to be more effective, we need to address these structural areas, not just the financial areas. And so my recommendation, the last slide. Yep. So my recommendation will be that first and foremost, the government should provide interventions in the form of capacity support. There has to be some ways in which the government facilitates the relationship between BDSP providers and the small businesses. This was done recently through one of the interventions that the Federal Ministry of Trade and Investment had with World Bank. And it was a project called the Business Innovation and Growth Scheme, where they appointed a lot of BDSPs to look for small businesses, to provide them with support, do some training need analysis, capacity analysis, and then once they identify the areas where they could unlock growth in those enterprises, the World Bank had made available some funding to actually help those small businesses. These are areas where I believe that interventions need to be defined right now to help businesses. Many businesses may not even be needing finance at this point. They could unlock some of their own capital or do some other things by changing their business model or pivoting their business at this time, and they need some support in terms of capacity understanding. Aramide was talking to a consultant recently, and they were bouncing off ideas as to how to reposition the business for growth. These are things that I believe are very much needed at this point in time. Like I also mentioned, there's a need for us to enhance the ecosystem. We need to improve on collaboration, and platforms like WIMBIZ has to find ways to help to strengthen the ecosystem of small businesses by connecting all the various players that are required. In Nigeria, we have those who you call business angels, who are willing to support businesses, small businesses with funds. We have the venture capital industry that is also growing without necessarily asking for credit or giving you time to pay back, but giving you a longer time to buy you out eventually from your business if they have funded you. There are various ways by funds can be attracted to small businesses, and there are different kinds of support that organizations can provide within the ecosystem. Digital. At a point in time, Google was putting out some hotspots, working with Main One, putting out broadband internet in some key areas for retail. I believe they can go back to those kinds of interventions to help small businesses have internet access, broadband access, to migrate them into the e-commerce space. And then, of course, finally, I also think that the national governments and subnational governments can continue to facilitate access to markets by by creating more fairs, doing a lot of fairs at this time, helping small businesses to, again, begin to get back their customers, and making these fairs subsidized or making them even free to patronize, to promote your products, and then helping to kind of create a marketplace where buyers and sellers can come and meet. So these are areas where there can still be a lot more interventions around the structure, around the ecosystem, around helping small businesses to grow. And those are my recommendations, and I hope that these thoughts are things that those of us who are here, who can also influence policies of government, can begin to talk to them to look at these areas to make it more adequate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gbenga. That was indeed excellent, wonderful. A round of applause, virtual claps for Gbenga. Thank you very much. So to just quickly do a summary of some of the things that Gbenga shared with us. He shared, of course, the intervention across the world, and the key thing there that we saw that these were designed to primarily leverage the way their respective ecosystems are structured. It also reflects the level of maturity and how well these are integrated. Of course, he shared with us the fact that, as we all know, that Nigeria is at the teething stage in terms of building our own robust ecosystem. We also spoke about the structural, how relevant, the ease of doing business, how we need to improve on the structural intervention, that was more critical for Nigeria, so all the initiatives around the ease of doing business, access to electricity, something as basic as that other countries will probably take for granted. And then, of course, the fact that the effective intervention, it needs to also work in tandem with trying to bridge the gap. So banks, for instance, have certain constraints. SMEs themselves have certain constraints. So the intervention has to find a way to bridge the gap between the banks and the SMEs. You spoke about the National Collateral Registry. I'm going to ask you a question around that, even though you had tried to explain, but I think there's need to be a bit more practical in that regard. And finally, he said that the platforms like WIMBIZ need to improve collaboration to enhance the integration of key players to strengthen the ecosystem. We certainly have taken that feedback and can assure you that we already have programs aligned in that regard. So I have a couple of questions. The first one relates to the interventions across the world. About 205 of the policies that you highlighted relate to employment support for small-scale industries. If we were to replicate, if government was to replicate those kind of interventions in Nigeria, what limitations do you foresee, if any?
Okay, thank you for that question, Adebisi. Let me first of all sort of give an overview of how those employment support interventions work. So government, because they know that small businesses are major employers of people, always desire to ensure that people stay employed, and therefore those small businesses do not let go of their employees and downsize, as the case may be. So they try to intervene by appealing to these small businesses to keep their payroll. And what they do is allow those small businesses to have access to working capital, whereby they can get funding from government to pay their employees for a period, maybe a period of 1 to 3 months, an extended period, hoping that by the time the 4th month kicks in, they will begin to at least generate some business and income to begin to pay their own employees. What that does is that the payroll and the employers are able to manage the payroll for the employees while they were in that lockdown, or the impact of the COVID was affecting them. Now, but for most of these small businesses, they already do tax returns for their employees. They're already on the list of the government's books in regards to payee tax. So they're able to validate the payroll, validate the number of employees they have. But in Nigeria, that is not the case. Most of our small businesses are not very formal. They are not integrated to government. So even many of our small businesses do not pay tax. They don't remit their payee tax unless they're formalized and structured businesses. In Lagos alone, the workforce in Lagos will be well over, say, 6 to 8 million. But when you go to Lagos State and you ask what are the numbers of payee tax that is being remitted, you'll be hearing figures like 800,000. So it means a lot of small businesses that have employees in their payroll are not currently even remitting any taxes to government. So it's going to be very difficult for government to identify who are the genuine small businesses that have payroll that they can support with employment support interventions, so that they do not let go of their staff. So once you don't have those records and you don't have those integrations, it becomes a major challenge. But one of the things, again, that government has done is that going forward, for anybody who wants to register a business, one of the things you need to have, if you want to open an account, you want to open a business account, you have to have a tax identification number. But that is just for your enterprise. That also does not have to do with the payee tax for your employees, which the state governments generally tend to manage. So all of these structural systems are where we should have a lot of interventions and even provide some level of amnesty to employers of labor today, so that we can then get them to at least subscribe to these formalized structures. What formalized structures does is that it allows government policies to impact on the small businesses. Today you have a lot of pronouncements, but you don't have effectiveness because there's a disconnect between the people that are trying to provide the fund and those who need the fund because of that structural imbalance. And these are the areas we think that government needs to come up with a lot of interventions to help small businesses at this time.
Thank you very much, Gbenga. So it does sound like a chicken and egg, and you wonder which one should come first, the chicken or the egg. But I get you, I hear you, that perhaps an amnesty is what is required at this point, rather than, compel people to actually go start paying taxes. This is probably not the time to do so. The other one was on the collateral registry. I know that you've spoken about it, but in practical terms, but I already see one or two questions in that regard. In practical terms, can you please describe the process, if I'm a small scale business owner, and let's say, I'm a fashion designer and I have, some knitting equipment or some spinning equipment. How do I go about it? What are the steps towards accessing this?
Okay, excellent. Now, so what then happens is this, you need to work with a financial service organization. Most of the time you find that small businesses, and I remember when Aramide was talking, she gave some words about working on your business rather than working in your business. A lot of small business owners tend to work in their business, not on their business. So when you work on your business, you take a step back and you say, okay, this is my business, these are the assets I have. I've got a machine, I've got a small generator, I've got a cutting machine, I've got a couple of things, air conditioning. Now, how can I grow this business? Where can I get funding to grow this business? Now, if you can go to a financier and say, I have these assets. Yes, I know they are movable. I can take my AC and take it home. I can take my generator and take it home, okay? So these are movable assets. Historically, they could not be used as collateral. But now with the collateral registry, movable asset collateral registry, the financier can look at these assets and value them, and look at the worth of these assets and put a lien on those assets. So a lien means that they would say, okay, we're going to register these assets with the collateral registry and advance you some loan. Of course, I think you're not going to get the entire value of the assets as your loan. So maybe
sorry to interrupt you.
Should be at
sorry
least
to interrupt
twice.
you. Sorry to interrupt you. Just to be clear, so I take this to my bankers. I take this asset that I have to my bankers. I'm just asking.
You inform your bankers. Yeah, you inform your bankers. I mean, you're not going to carry them to the bankers.
Yeah.
You take your bankers to your organization and show them these assets.
Show them
that I have these assets. Again, one of the key things I will also mention is you're expected to have documentation. So you should have your receipts that show proof of ownership. You should have things that show to you that these are my assets. Yeah. So once you take your banker to show them these are my assets, you have the proof of ownership of those assets. The bank can value those assets for you and then advance you 50% of the value of those assets. So if all my assets are worth ₦1 million, I should be able to get loan from the bank of about 500,000 naira. That becomes a liquid asset I can use to grow my business. Before now, I wouldn't have been able to get 500,000 naira in my hands to buy stock, to buy materials, to do some advertisements, to generate more demand, to improve my business. I would not have been able to do that, even though I had this 1 million naira worth of assets in my hand. So historically, I will still be growing my business in trickles. But now I can actually collateralize my loan with these movable assets and unlock certain amount of capital that becomes a huge amount of money in my hands to now grow my business even at a faster rate. And that's what this registry does. So the bankers it's an online transaction. You can actually log in from your own portal. The bankers will log in from their own portal. You know, you don't have to do many visits and all of that, but it's just a question of valuation.
Okay, I think that Gbenga has a little bit of connectivity issues. So we'll go straight to the questions. Again, I'll just remind you to put your questions in the Q&A box. And if you have, so we have a few questions there now, pending the time when we get Gbenga back on. Aramide would have to assist us with these questions. The first one is, what advice would you have, and this is a question from Sarah, what advice would you have to give for those businesses in the travel and tourism industry during and post the pandemic? Aramide.
Yeah, this is one of the industries that has been the hardest hit. Okay, I don't know if my video, yes, I'll just start my video. This is one of the industries which has been the hardest hit in this whole crisis. And we have a number of travel entrepreneurs in our network. So it's been interesting listening to them and just trying to understand how they're going about managing the whole period. And one thing that a lot of them are doing, resources, for example, because there's just no work, right? So it's not like any travel is going to come out of nowhere. There's a global pandemic, there's no travel at all. And so it means that they may have to start looking at downsizing for the time being. And so, and that's realistic enough because of what is on ground. The second thing is quite a few of them are now beginning to explore other streams of income. So, it's not to say that they're leaving the industry completely, but in the time that this is happening, if they have other skills, why not begin to monetize those skills? And then the third thing that I've seen quite a few of them do, and we were having a good chat in the travel subgroup, was they're beginning to plan for when, travel starts again. So what are the promotional activities you're going to introduce or offers you're going to introduce in your business, in the markets, right, for people to take advantage. Some people are even ready to even pay for travel ahead just to be sure that they can get out, because so many people just want to go somewhere else after all of this. And so I think it's important to capitalize on that whole emotional need to want to travel by leveraging digital and social media and beginning to engage people and your audience in advance. And I guess I'll just add a bonus point. One thing I've seen is museums across the world beginning to launch virtual tours. So if you think about it, virtual is also another way to go. There are ways you can then tap into that virtual market. There's an exhibition that's very popular in England now. They're on virtual. There's quite a few museums in France and UK. They're having virtual tours. You can go in and look around. And so there's just a lot of ideas. But one thing a mentor of mine did say, another mentor, was the only way you can be creative is when you're not anxious. When you're anxious, there's a blockage, and so it doesn't let you think creatively. So I know that the travel industry, there's a lot of pressure, but sometimes it might be worth, just relaxing and then thinking of ways to monetize or even creatively stand out in your industry.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you. I like the bit about the virtual tours. Let's see how that picks up. Welcome back.
Thank you. We had a bit of it was a power outage.
Yes. Technology. So there's a question for you here. Talking about the asset collateralization, the example you gave about the generator, does it mean that the bank or the finance organization will have custody of the generator? I think you answered it, but just to be clear.
Yeah. They wouldn't have custody. So you will continue to hold custody to your assets, and you deploy your assets for the use in your business. So what happens is the asset will be tagged, all documentation on the asset, like the serial number and the general information about that asset specific to the asset will be taken, and it will be recorded with the collateral, the movable collateral registry. And so if anyone really truly wants to dispose of any asset, any buyer of any movable asset should actually log on. So as a public person, you have no credit, you have no financial intermediation facility, you just want to buy an asset from a company or from someone. Ideally, what you should do is go to the registry and check, is this asset under any form of lien? So that's the only process. So in order to forestall a business owner having taken the credit and yet then selling the assets, in order to avoid that, they advise that anyone that wants to buy any movable asset now, it's not a new asset, but a used one, ideally you should go to the registry to check that is any lien on that asset. So the asset remains with the asset owner. You will continue to use your asset for your business, and all you have done is just to unlock the capital that asset could unlock for you to be able to also generate more income to grow your business.
Thank you.
So they would not take the assets away from you, not at all.
Okay. I have a follow-up question to that, and I think I asked you that offline earlier on. Can you just give us a sense? Lots of us are skeptics. We sort of want to know that indeed this is actually happening. So how? Do you have a sense of how many? What numbers in terms of either volume in naira or in terms of numbers of people that have accessed this registry? Do you have a sense?
No, I don't. In terms of numbers of enterprises or people, no, I don't. But in terms of value, up to about 2 trillion naira of capital has been facilitated, and that is not a small amount of money.
That's a lot.
But in terms of how many number of enterprises or what's the average size, of that of the intermediation of loan, I don't have those details. But I'm sure at some point these sort of analysis and data will start getting to the public. Let me mention that this was something that had the involvement of the IFC, World Bank, and a lot of African countries have taken this on. Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and the success of financing to small businesses have kind of hit the roof in terms of the penetration of financing to this because of just these small assets. And it actually had the backing of an act. So there was an act of parliament. The National Assembly had to make an act available, and that was also signed into to become an act by the president. So it's all exactly to become a law. So it's all backed up by legal structures, and it is now acceptable as a collateral for doing business.
Absolutely. It would be useful to have those numbers, just to allay the skepticism that people have. There's a question here.
Yeah,
I'll try and recouch it. Can you use a car as collateral in this instance?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, you can. So if you're an Uber owner and you have a car, you can also use that same car to unlock capital to buy another one.
Oh, okay.
So it's a multiplier effect. Yes. So what happens is this. The issue about unlocking capital is how do I show proof of ownership that this asset is mine? That's a fundamental thing that is. So even when you use a house, most people have houses, but they don't have the documentation from government that show that this house belongs to you. See your goal and all the other things that are required. So even though you have a house, you're living in a house, or you have some assets, because you don't have those documentations to prove that you own it, you cannot unlock the value that that house represents. Absolutely. And so that's what happens. So the challenge is to really be able to ensure that at least you have documentation that proves that these assets belong to you. For unmovable assets that are high value, that may be difficult. It takes a long while for government to come out. It takes a long while for you to process your house papers. But for things like your movable assets, it's just a receipt. That's all you need. So these are things that you can easily unlock and then get capital to begin to fund your business from there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Aramide, I would have you take a shot at this one. I render traditional wedding service.
If I may comment.
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to confirm something that Aramide did say about the tourism industry. Even though she gave examples of international museums, that is also actually happening in Port Harcourt. And so if you Google Port Harcourt virtual tours or something like that, there is a company that is already going about offering virtual tours of hotels, pleasure locations, and facilities that in itself will begin to enable tourism. So you have an experience of the locations you are going to. So one of the critical things that happened was people coming to Port Harcourt, but they only come in for business trips. People don't see Port Harcourt as a destination location. So they come into Port Harcourt, you are going for an oil and gas industry function or meeting or a financial meeting. Once you're through, you're stuck in your hotel and then you go back and you haven't really experienced.
You go and spend 4 hours at the airport.
Now, exactly. Exactly. So now they are creating these virtual tours where you can actually plan your day out. You can identify locations, have a feel of what you will see. And so what these things do is that they don't even replace the actual going there. They actually stimulate your going there. So people used to have this fear that, if I see it already online, then what's the point? Look, when you see it online, it gives you a good feel, but then when you go physically, you get a deeper level of experience. So these are things that are already happening in Nigeria as we speak.
Fantastic. Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much. So, Aramide, I was saying you probably want to take a stab at this. I render traditional wedding service, i.e. the alaga compare, and I also supply all the stuff and it's registered, and we remit our taxes, we remitted our tax up till December 2019. How easily can I access intervention or any loan or grant at that?
Okay, so I presume she's talking about the intervention loan that was advertised, which is the one Gbenga was referencing as well. We have seen many entrepreneurs or SMEs actually apply for that loan and then get called by intermediaries to screen them with questions. So it's actually very possible. Again, in terms of a loan, it's whether you have the collateral, and I think Mr. Gbenga has, identified or listed out quite a few things that will be required, and for MSMEs, and there's some leeway. So it's worth looking at what the eligibility is, but I wouldn't cross it out at all. I would say knock on every door you can. So just because you're in a service business does not mean you can't access the loan. Number one, and number two, in terms of grants, there are a number of grants available for businesses that are trying to tackle the coronavirus, issues around coronavirus, not necessarily only health, but anything around the coronavirus. So from a grant standpoint, that's the knowledge I have in terms of what's available. But definitely the NERSAL CBN loan is available. It doesn't say that you have to be from one sector in particular. It's worth, checking and then seeing whether you're eligible, you have everything that is in place. And then maybe I'll hand over to Gbenga to just
yes,
maybe...
I was going to, yes. Gbenga, do you want to please provide some additional
Yes,
info?
I will. So essentially for the CBN loan, you have to be an operating business. So you have to have evidence that you were already operating, minimum of 1 year or 3 years. And what that means is that there has to be evidence of your bank statements as a business that shows the kind of income that you've been generating, and the loan you can get 30% as working capital of the value of your turnover, your annual turnover. If it's 3 years, it will be the annual average turnover for those 3 years, about 30%. If it's 1 year, I think it's about 25% as the value of working capital loan you can have access to. So if you're already a going concern, and you already had a business, you already had evidence that you were doing business, and COVID has affected that business, then all you need to do is present this sort of information, and then you can become eligible for access. But then you have to walk through a financial institution like NISAL or any of the banks.
Thank you very much. Aramide, I guess this would be for you. Talking about partnership in SMEs, can you give clarity as it can relate to a fashion designer desiring to go into partnership to expand production, i.e. Meet mass market demand?
Okay. So I presume the person wants to know, wants clarity on who they need to be partnering with.
They need to be partnering with, absolutely, since you spoke about collaborating.
Okay, so for example, I know of a fashion designer who has seen, she identified she's in Abuja and identified a garment manufacturing factory. So she doesn't do any of the production. She just has partnered with them, and of course they have the terms clear. She designs and then they produce. So that's an example. So for you, if you're going into mass market, for example, it's very different from maybe like a ready-to-wear bespoke type. It's two different models. You have to look at it and see what is the need, who is out there, how can I reach out to them? I think it's important to sit down and think about, okay, so what am I trying to achieve? It's to meet mass market. How will I get to the mass market? So is it maybe to partner with distribution companies that can help you get your products across? Or if it's from a production standpoint, you need to partner with a private label factory that can help you just do all the production, and what you do is do the designing, so that then it's easy for you and then it's clear what everyone's doing. So those are some of the things I would say, but it's definitely just identify what you want to achieve first, and then you can then map out how you're going to get there and who the players would be that would feed into that strategy. And then start researching, networking, finding out who's available that can do this type of thing.
Absolutely. Or perhaps packaging. I mean, if you want to do mass market, perhaps you want to get somebody that would help you with the packaging. Thank you. Thank you very much. Gbenga, if you would help us with this question, what COVID-19 interventions?
Sorry, BC, can I just
please go ahead.
Speak to the question
please.
Aramide just answered? Again,
please go ahead.
I think one of the major bane of Nigeria's low growth has been that for many of us, we don't understand what it means to specialize. And so when you look at the developed industries, developed economies, many of those economies became specialists in certain segments, right? And then you create a value chain or a supply chain across board. So today, everyone wants to be a fashion designer. And so you have to have your own tailors, you have to have your own cut, you have to have your own marketing, you try to do your own labeling, and all of the challenges you're going to be faced with, right? Whereas if we had done specializations, okay, if you go to Area or one of those markets in Aba, there is nothing you want to sew you can't sew out there, right? But if you are a fashion designer and your own specialization is understanding trends, understanding colors, understanding the seasons, understanding what designs to bring out, and you focus on that and you do your pattern cutting, then all you need to do is just get these people to translate that pattern cutting to different sizes and production and what have you, and then you just get outlets who will do the selling. So you have people who are involved in style management, people who do retail of clothing, you know, so everyone has to specialize and begin to understand, where do I belong? Where is my competence? Where's my passion? What do I want to do? You know, and then link that into a value chain. So we all are now working together to collaborate. And I think that is one thing that has been a major problem. And these are the things that platforms like yourself need to facilitate, you know, talk about, and then connect people together so that they can begin to identify their specialization areas.
Absolutely. Rather than want to be jack of all trades. Okay. Thank you.
Exactly. And too small.
And too small, yeah. What COVID-19 interventions are available for schools or school owners? Gbenga, are there specific interventions available to schools?
Big question.
That's a tough one, and it's one sector that is very badly hit. They can't go back to school. They can't charge school fees for third term.
Yeah, it's a catch-22. So they're all running online courses.
Absolutely.
The question is, are they going to bill me? Because even as a parent, I have to buy all the data, buy the computers, use generator. Exactly. So Lagos State has said, we haven't even started third term, so nobody should be asking for bills. Yeah. So it's a very difficult thing. I think that is one area that not much I have heard about. Education, regrettably also, education in most of the developed world is public. Okay, it's only in the developing world where education is privately driven, and therefore we don't have templates to leverage, and so we have to create our own homegrown solutions. I think at some point there has to be a lot of discussions around that. But if anything at all, we also have to find a way to move back to public education. It's very costly when we talk about private education. It's high cost.
Absolutely. Aramide, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, so there are interventions from, I wouldn't say government, but there are non-profit interventions for teachers in terms of, so just to support teachers in this time, because of course there's no work at the moment, but for school owners, not too sure. I think then there'll be classed as entrepreneurs, so which means they can access, you know, whatever an entrepreneur would typically access anyway. So those are
correct.
Thank you, absolutely. Given the capital outlay, so this is the question for Aramide. From your experience, what are the likely pitfalls or red flags we could look out for when we want to collaborate with other businesses? What values should we look out for?
Yes, and you know, the person almost even answered the question
by themselves,
So because values is one of the major things. In fact, that is the key thing. If anything, your values have to align. If they're not aligned, it could hurt you eventually. There have been opportunities for us to partner, but when we identify that there was a misalignment in values, we bit the bullet, even though it seemed attractive. So I think it's important to focus on values, if anything. And then other red flags, like I said, you don't want to be going in as a savior of another business. So if someone was coming to partner with you and their business is sinking, you have to think about why you're partnering. So it's important to also know, have the due diligence done and all of that. And then I think many of us don't think long term, especially young entrepreneurs. So now, hopefully, a lot of us are with everything happening, which means that if you are beginning to partner, wanting to partner with someone, what is the end game? What's the exit, if anything? So those are the kind of things that should be brought to the discussion ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Gbenga, you want to jump in? Anything to add?
No, I fully agree with that. Again, collaboration is very important about the values and the understanding that, but people should also be willing to learn from mistakes. And so as long as the exits or the separations do not hurt you badly, so you learn your lessons and then you look for the next partnership. We shouldn't, because of one experience, then hinder ourselves from looking forward to other kinds of partnerships and opportunities that it affords. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then documentation is critical. I think Aramide had mentioned that at the beginning. So you have to clearly define your terms of engagement and the terms of exit as well. At what point do we leave and what will make us leave? Okay. I would have both of you answer this. What would you consider the 5 most important, and there could be more than this, business, legal, or financial structures that a new business should put in place? Gbenga, you want to start? What would you consider to be the five most critical?
5 most important.
Important, yes. Could be more than 5, but what would you consider to
well,
be?
I mean, yeah. So first and foremost, you have to have your business registered, obviously. Formalizing the business, meaning going to CAC and having all your documentations appropriate, your memorandum of article of association and all the stuff you need. Everything that has to do with your business in terms of incorporation and inclusive of being able to transact. So have a bank account. Many businesses, you'll be surprised today, still do not have a separation of their bank the business account from the owner's account. You know, and those sort of things are required, because if you don't separate it, you can't even bequeath your business. Most people are not able to bequeath their businesses to the next generation because the business doesn't have anything as an entity to show its life. Or even to sell the business becomes difficult. So all your incorporation documents and the things that show you are transacting as a business, I would say that is primary. If you have patent, and I think Aramide had talked about that. If you have patents, if you have copyrights, things that will also, to a large extent, show your ownership of your creativity or your innovation, it's also important to have all of those clearly documented and articulated. Those things sell. You can trade on them. They actually create value. They are intangibles, but they do create value. They create some level of enterprise value that you can leverage over years. So you find some people buying businesses all for the name or when the business was established. And you say things like, this business, you call the brand, and you say since 1845. Now, if your business has been operational since 1845, it means that you've been through thick and thin. You've been through the troughs and the growth. You know, people will be assured that if I work with this business or I do transaction with this business, it's there for the long run. It's not a new business. It's not a startup. You know, so being able to also have those kinds of things are very important. What else would you? Then, of course, formalizing your contractual relationship with your employees. I would say that is also very critical. Most people hire people, they don't have documentations of what am I hiring you for, what are the terms of engagement, you know. And in today's world, we're now beginning to see there are different forms and fashion of workforce. You don't have to have all your employees on your payroll, so to speak, you know, as full-time employees or who resume somewhere. You have to be a bit flexible, and you have to have flexible documentation and employment agreements with your employees. And you can leverage all kinds of employees. What you need is skills. Businesses need skills at different points in time. And so rather than me keeping a skill for a long time and then looking for what do I do with this person when the skill is no longer required, why didn't I hire the person for just a shorter time in a flexible way I could exit myself, you know, because I know that the skill is only for a temporary period. You know, and those are the kind of things that we also need to begin to do. Many times, that is where professional services come in. When you engage professional service providers, yes, it may be additional cost, but they are helping you to put these proper structures in place that help your business for the long run. Okay. What else would I say? I think in terms of the assets, understanding your business itself, being able to really, really define your business model. How am I making money? How am I losing money? How am I creating value? Having those clear understanding and articulating it. It's like architecting. People build homes today, you won't believe, with architectural drawings. So they just go to site and they just mark out on a small piece of paper, you know, and they start putting the blocks together. Because they don't want to pay for the architect, they don't want to pay for the, you know, as you said with businesses. So a lot of people that do business, they don't really know how is my business making money. They have not modeled the business appropriately to understand what exactly is my income model, what is my my cost structure, you know, and having those financial information that helps you to see your business in a way that you can actually understand whether you're growing or you're not growing, or you're creating value or you're destroying value. People see cash flow, but they don't know whether they're making profit or not. So those are kind of things that we mention as part of the things that you need.
Thank you, Gbenga. Aramide, do you want to add a few things?
I think Gbenga has covered a lot, but I will. I thought about two things, maybe three. Two of them structural, one is more strategic. The first is SOPs, so standard operating procedures. When you start writing out processes for every type of role, it makes things easier. Even when you fill a role, for example, with an intern, it's just clear what everybody's doing. Then you see where there's duplication of tasks. SOPs are just the best thing for any business. It's quite a bit of work initially, but then it makes things so easy for you eventually. And then one thing I realized a lot of businesses don't do, I definitely didn't do it when I launched my first business at 26. I set up an SMS marketing company. I didn't explore the regulatory environment. So of course, eventually then when the NCC then introduced certain measures, I couldn't compete. So, and then obviously, you know, that was a failed business, but I learned from it. So explore the regulatory environment for your business. Don't just set up a business and just, you know, focus on the market or customers or competitors. Just look at what regulation says. Then from a strategic standpoint, you know, define what your strategy is, and it doesn't have to be a 100-page document. In my mind, I've seen strategy as just one sentence, and then you flesh it out. So for you, your strategy is clear, then your every segment of your business then has a strategy and then feeds into the overarching strategy. So your marketing has a strategy, your operations, there's a strategy there, your finance, there's a strategy there, and so on and so forth. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you. So there's a question here. Given the capital outlay involved in business digitalization, which is obviously the way to go, now and post-COVID, how should micro and small businesses go about this? What are the steps towards digitalizing their businesses? Aramide, you want to start?
Okay, so the steps to digitization, is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a good question. Definitely, again, so going back to strategy, you know, you have to define what your objective is. So yes, you want to digitize, but what are you trying to achieve when you go digital? You know, when you're clear on your digital strategy, then it feeds into everything else. So I think the first thing is to be clear on your digital strategy, define it, then you're able to know what channels you're going to use, who your target is. You know, for example, if you're using digital media channels, what the messaging would be, because you're clear on what your strategy is. So that's the first thing. And then second thing is go lean, even when you're going digital. So the good thing about digital now is there's a lot of tools available for you to leverage without having to break the bank or even spend. So especially in these times, the key thing is to latch onto those things without having to even make any significant expenditure unless necessary. And then the third thing in terms of going digital is, you know, I think I mentioned this recently, that there are no more, the boundaries have disappeared. So that allows you to begin to even transact internationally when you didn't before, you couldn't before. And so for you then start identifying what maybe a global market for you looks like, or a Pan-African market for you looks like, and how you're going to then achieve reaching them or tailoring your offering to them. Sometimes it may be a language thing where you have to translate, or whatever it is. So again, I'd say think big and go lean and find your strategy.
Thank you very much. Gbenga, anything to add? Going digital?
Yes, again, there is a popular template. It's online. It's a very simple template that enables people to understand the dynamics of their business, the building blocks of their business. It's called the Business Model Canvas. And it actually highlights businesses as building blocks with 9 different elements that make it up. So when you're going digital, it will be nice for you to study that Business Model Canvas. It's a very simple canvas that just lays out in front of you. And you can begin to identify in each block, how do I want to use technology or digital technologies to improve my business? So looking at my market, today, how do you sell? How do you go online? So you have Jumia, you have Shopify, you have a lot of these banks even have their own SME platforms that they can enlist you on. You'll be surprised that even Google has various ways by which you can enlist your business. So today, all of us use Google Map. But what if I type your company name? Will it show you up on Google Map? Will it tell me your address? Will it give me a view of your location? Google has trained so many young people that are out there now, helping them populate and getting as much small businesses online onto their map. So there are various things you can do. That's on the marketing end. Now, even digitizing your own operations, like Aramide had mentioned, payment. Today now you have Paystack, you have Flutterwave, you have all kinds of payment organizations that help you to be able to invoice and get payment from your customers online. There are all manner of various ways by which transactions can be done now. You can invoice and get payments online. And then even digitizing receipts, documentation, various handsets, various devices are things that you can use to capture all this information and then hopefully store them. There's a lot of things you can have on the cloud. When you buy space on the cloud, they're not that expensive, to store documentations and all of that. You just need to create your own structure and your own tree. And so digitalization is something that is really in the hands of people. Yes, you have to have a plan and have a strategy of how big I want to be, how am I going, but in the various elements of your business, you also have to have implementation plans to which segments am I digitizing before what, and how do they integrate, so that they are also all not working in cross purposes. But small businesses cannot really implement ERPs like the big businesses, but they can use some tools that are readily available to them that they can use. Even WhatsApp is, you have WhatsApp for business, So all manner of things. Instagram, people are selling selling their products on Instagram. And so there are various things you can do, simple technologies, simple tools, but that business model canvas will help you to map and to know, okay, what am I doing in all of these areas? What channel am I using? What tools am I using? And how do they speak to each other so that you're in control?
Thank you. Thank you, Gbenga. I would appreciate if you would share that link with us subsequently, the one that has the 9 elements of digitalizing your business. I think we begin to round up now, so I'll take one of the last set of questions. Can you speak to how SMEs can, well, we've spoken quite a lot about how to access the funding, but I guess this question looks to how can they make themselves attractive, what will put one SME at an advantage in accessing the funding? What do they need to do to make themselves look good? Aramide, a few tips.
Okay, so am I on mute? Yeah. Okay, so in terms of accessing the funding, again, having all your books in order, Gbenga reference, I can't stress that enough. That's what puts you ahead. From what I've seen with the entrepreneurs that have received calls from the NERSL contacts and intermediaries, have been those who have everything in order. And so they've asked them a range of questions and they said, okay, we'll get back to you. So it does sound like that's promising for them. So the first thing is have your books in order. And then the second is, I'd say maybe you just have the right references for just in case there will be reference checks. So if you've had work with anyone and they're able to reference you, that also helps. And then the third thing is just keep your air out, because initially, I believe there was a fee that entrepreneurs had to pay pay for a business plan, and that was lifted. Now, if you're not aware, you just think that that's what you have to pay a fee, and then maybe I'm not going to apply anyway. So it's important to have your ear out and just know everything going on, all the updates that are being made, the announcements from the central bank and the government. It's so important. So yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you. Gbenga, I'll allow you to chip in, but I want you to take it along with this question because during the course of your presentation, you had spoken about encouraging local brands, by buying local, particularly government and associated agencies. So the question is, what measures are being considered by government and financial institutions to help in terms of finance and acceptability? I guess acceptability of those local, because there's always the issue of standards when you compare those.
I'm not quite sure I got the question fully, please.
What measures are being considered by government, financial institutions to help through in terms of finance and acceptability? You had mentioned encouraging buying local, buying made in Nigeria products in the course of your presentation. So I guess this question was asking, to see, are there already existing measures in place to encourage, to encourage government and financial institutions, also in terms of accessibility?
Yeah. Well, very good question. I do know that, again, with a lot of stuff that comes out of government and the public sector, pronouncements are made, but then do we follow through on it? So you want to buy vehicles for the members of the National Assembly, and you're making a decision between whether we should buy Peugeot or Inosin or Toyota that is coming out of Japan, okay? And even though we do have government act, the Procurement Act that talks about encouraging small businesses, encouraging our own locally produced businesses. The acts are there, but no one follows through the enforcement. So the major buyers, government is a major buyer of services and products, and the major buyer is also the enforcer. So if they're not enforcing what they themselves have pronounced, then who's going to hold them to account? Maybe businesses may need to go to the courts to prove some of these laws, and to force the hands of government. So I would say to you, to that extent, these sort of things are there, at least at the national level, maybe not at the sub-national level, but I think that a lot of the chambers of commerce and their associations, aggregation associations like WIMBIZ, have to keep advocating and influencing governments to take these decisions. So there are things that we say, but the question is, how well do we follow through on it? So I can only say they exist somewhat on paper, but the enforcement and having to get them to do it. Like, look at the oil and gas industry, we had what was called the Local Content Act. That significantly improved how much of the local content could come into the oil and gas industry. But eventually, as that began to happen, a lot of the major assets were shifted out of the country to other locations of the world. So again, you find that it's a very difficult thing to really make happen, unless, of course, the will of government, and government itself is a violator, in this case, wanting to buy more luxurious foreign goods than the local ones. So I think it's something we just have to keep advocating for.
Absolutely. I think the will is the one that really is lacking. Thank you very much.
Well, we can test it in the courts, like I mentioned.
You reckon that we can?
Yeah, why not? I mean, if they usually send out tenders. If they send out tenders and I actually went in for the tender, I feel like I met all the criteria, but it wasn't purchased from me. Who knows? I can say, look, there are some liabilities or what have you. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but some of these things have to be proven by courts.
Yeah, so
that they are violating the law. If you are buying from abroad, if you are buying from abroad and you're supposed to buy local.
Yeah, so I'll tell you that it's a policy. There's no law saying that I have to buy local. But anyway, that's a conversation we can take offline. So there are still questions.
Okay, I thought I asked that.
Go ahead.
No, I said I thought they were acts of government. I think they were laws. I thought they were laws, not just policies.
The local content, yes, it's a law, but the buy local, it's a policy. I'm not aware that there is legislation that in that regard. Okay. Thank you very much. It's been fantastic. It's been a fantastic session, and I'm sure that both of you would have final words. I'll start with Aramide. Any final words? Any tips in 1 minute? Thank you.
Yes, so from me, I think it's time to think big, and there's no time like now. I know it does sound like there's a crisis, but there's opportunities arising. So it's important that when those opportunities come, we have to be prepared no matter what. So think big, don't think small. Small is not fancy. Thinking big is the way to go. So think big. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gbenga.
Yeah, I guess my final closing remarks would be that we should adapt. So as we keep learning, as we keep exposing ourselves to and make changes, that's the only thing that.
Thank you. Thank you.
And therefore, we just look forward and be very optimistic.
Thank you very much, Gbenga. Absolutely. A round of applause for our panelists. They've been awesome, and you yourselves have been awesome. I would like to just close with Aramide's do's that she shared earlier on. Do seek to approach challenges with a collaborative mindset. Face your fears. If you have to cut costs, please do so, and ensure that you communicate transparently with your employees and customers. Keep up and stay abreast with relevant news. So it was wonderful that you participated in these webinars. Some people are getting webinar weary. I would encourage you not to, and just ensure that you choose the right ones that would speak to the situation that you are in and what you want to get the benefit of. Have support systems and join community groups. WIMBIZ is a fantastic networking platform. You know, we have all manner of programs that will ensure that you're not alone, and whatever concerns that you have other people who have the same concerns and can help you swim through them, as it were. Work on your business, especially if you're unable to work in your business. Thank you very much. It's been awesome having you this evening. We're going to send you a link with a short questionnaire on how impactful this webinar has been, and you'll look out for details of the next one. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful evening. Thank you, Gbenga. Thank you, Aramide.
Thank you very much.
All the best.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a lovely evening, everyone. God bless you. Bye.